Hi, thank you so much for joining us on our Facebook Live. I'm Ariel Fawn with MSBCoach, and every month we've been talking about a different leadership topic, and today we are talking about adaptive leadership, and I'm really excited. Today we have Melissa Frederick from UVA with us. I'm so glad that you're here with us.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so will you just tell us a little bit about your role with UVA and what you do?
Sure. I am the Senior Director of Service for University Operations, and I support all of the operational areas that help keep the university running and supporting the students and its academic mission. And I oversee the team of business partners that are the local HR resource.
Awesome. Well, I bet you have a lot of insight to share with us today on adaptive leadership.
I think I do. There's been a lot of change.
Yeah. So again, thank you guys for watching, whether it's live or the replay. Please leave us some comments and any questions that you might have, and we'll get back to you. But to start our discussion today, what is adaptive leadership? What does that mean to you?
So adaptive leadership, it appeals to the scientist in me, the natural scientist in me, because it talks about organizations being more like an organism and having to adapt and change and thrive in their environment and respond to all pieces of their environment and all the different inputs. And so I think one of the terms or one of the phrases that you hear used in human resources many times is right person in the right job at the right time. Yeah. That's a demonstration of it's a leadership style that's constantly assessing, making adjustments, trying to plan ahead.
Okay, awesome. And what kind of skills or traits does a leader need to be adaptive?
So adaptive leaders, there are so many traits that really help somebody be considered an adaptive leader. But some of the things that I think are most important would be somebody who's proactive, always thinking ahead to the future of what could happen, or making sure that you're not constantly fighting fires. You're thinking ahead to say, I know this is coming, let's prepare for it. Mm-hmm. I think an adaptive leader also understands that they don't have the only right answer or the only right viewpoint, so they're very interested in diverse perspectives, so that when you come up with your plan or your decision, you've taken into account that information. It makes it a better thing. And then I think probably the final thing that I would consider one of the major ones is they're really knowledgeable about what their stakeholders want, because in the end we could be the best technician possible, but if we're not meeting stakeholders' needs or wants, it's not making them successful either.
Right.
Or the organization.
Definitely. And saying some of those things of knowing what the stakeholder wants and asking questions, routine that. We like to talk about emotional intelligence a lot around here, because it's just kind of the core of everything. So how do you see the importance of emotional intelligence and working with adaptive leadership?
So I think emotional intelligence is key with so many different leadership styles and theories. But what especially resonates here is when I think about emotional intelligence, people have to be open to understanding how they react. They need to be self-aware, but they also need to be empathetic and taking into account how they're communicating with people. And so that helps them become an adaptive leader. Yeah. And it really sets a strong basis.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. And so I would love to hear some personal experiences you've had. What's been a positive or maybe even a negative situation that you've been in or witnessed?
Yeah. So it's interesting because as I learned more about adaptive leaders, I realized that my boss is very much an adaptive leader. Yeah. And my current boss is somebody who has come into an organization that's experiencing great change. Mm-hmm. And so immediately as I sit back and I observe, he comes in, he has a natural curiosity, but he seeks information from a diverse group of people. He gets many different perspectives, but then he balances that with really what the stakeholders that we're supporting are wanting or needing from us, and he's able to put that together. The other thing is he's always open to stepping back and having us do a debrief, and certainly will, say, hey, you know what, we looked at that. I made that decision and I misread it. I wish I would have handled it this way. And that opens you up to everybody being open to learning and saying, okay, not everybody is going to make 100% of the right decisions.
Right.
So it's been a great experience because especially with change, so many different things can morph or evolve over time that you have to take into account those pieces of information.
Right. And that's good that he, will step up and, say if something didn't go as planned, because, anything could happen. Like, you plan the best that you can and utilize information, but then things can go a certain way. So even when you are initially adaptive, it's like you still have to be adaptive.
That is so true. That is so true.
And no, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, because you never know what's coming around the next corner. As much as you plan, you may get new information from getting the perspective from somebody that causes you to take a pause and say, are we really on the right track, or should we rethink this?
Right, yeah. And so what other impact do you see on the being a good adaptive leader? Like, how does that really impact the team and organization?
So I think it can be very enlightening for the team, because an adaptive leader isn't so much focused on their position or their authority in the organization. Yeah. They're out there getting information from the people who are the subject matter experts. Yeah. And so much of that is the people who really do the work understand why it's either working or not working.
Right.
And so it's important to bring that back in and say, okay, knowing this information, how can we change, make people's lives better, make our product or our service better. Right. And it really helps keep people engaged and feel like they have input.
Right, yeah. That's good to have that open communication. And I know sometimes people think that leaders might just make decisions and they don't know what's going on, and you can't really make a good decision if you don't communicate with everybody to see the full picture.
Yeah, and a big part of that communication is really that active listening.
Yes.
And the active listening is something that I know my current boss does so well, and it's been really key to people feeling like they've been heard, feeling like any plans that we take include their perspective.
Yeah, that's so great to hear. And have you ever had a experience where you've had a leader that wasn't so adaptive or open to change?
Yeah, and I think it happens more often than not, because sometimes you get caught up into, I've made this decision, it's all systems go, and you're going down one track, but you get information and you're like, I don't want to seem weak, or I don't want to stop, so we'll just keep going because that's what we decided. So some of the challenge is knowing, because you're not going to change course every single time. You're taking into account that information, and you may or may not change course, but it's having that courage to say, we got to take a pause, and there's no harm in that. I think I would use the example coming from healthcare previously. A lot of the medical errors, many times people in an operating room would see that they were going to operate on the wrong body part, but there was that stigma to raising their hand and saying, wait, time out. And so it's some of that you have to be open to making sure that we all have each other's backs. It really reinforces the team concept.
Yeah, and so it kind of really takes some courage
to
step up and say, we need to change gears here.
Because it's not always popular.
Right.
Like, what?
And then I'm sure you've seen a lot of how it's impacted the team negatively when someone's just wanted to stay the course when it's been not the best one.
Yeah. Maybe akin to watching a train wreck sometimes, but hopefully not. Hopefully not.
Exactly. So how do you, how can someone encourage their direct reports to be responsive to change?
So I think a big part of helping people understand the change is understanding the need for change. Why do we have to do something differently, or why does the product need to change? I think it's also outlining the downstream benefits of making that change, because usually there's an environmental impact, to sound scientist-ish, that causes you to make the change. Maybe it's a change in your funding model, maybe it's a change in like your supplier, but on the end of that, there will also be a benefit to the people who are doing the work if you're making that change and making their process more efficient, making the product more popular or viable. You know, there's so many different things that you need to tell them of why this is a necessary change. You're not changing for the sake of changing, but because there is some impact that's making you respond to it.
Yeah, definitely. So kind of saying like what's in it for them.
Right. It's very much.
Yeah. And then so, I mean, sometimes you might have a leader that like, you know, change needs to happen, but they're not being as adaptive. Like how can people deal with that?
You know, that's a really great question, and I think it happens to all of us, because sometimes you get into your mindset and you're like, I'm on track and everything's going, and some of that is being brave enough to give some feedback to say, hey, you know, I noticed this.
Right.
Have you thought about, or what if, and really just bringing it up, not in a more direct way, but presenting as options to say, what if we tried this? Or, I noticed this, and here's some options I can think of, but you know, what's your sense of it? And it opens it up to dialogue versus something where people may be more threatened.
Right, yeah. And I love that approach of kind of like asking questions and getting them to think, you know, a little bit deeper. Because especially like with coaching, our thing is about asking powerful questions. And so I can definitely see that being tied in with adaptive leadership to, you know, ask questions to help encourage someone to change, but then as your boss does, you know, asking questions to kind of gather that feedback for change too. So
I think another tip is holding the silence till they kind of respond.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, you know, silence can be unnerving, but if you hold the silence, the person is like perhaps thinking about it, processing, and it gives them a chance to respond versus you just keeping talking, you know, keeping on the conversation.
Right, yeah. And so what tips do you have for a leader or an organization that's going through some changes? Like what kind of process do you recommend, steps?
You know, we are really fortunate. We have a gentleman who specializes in change management who supports us through all the changes that we're going on at the University of Virginia with transforming HR and putting in a new HRMS system. And so he's trained us really well to pay attention to stakeholders, get their input, you know, do reach outs, have the dialogue, but also tells us to listen very actively and get the feedback and look for the clues and the hints so that we can take their feedback into account. And I think that's so important, as well as making sure that you keep the communication going, because communication is a big part of the change management, and it's not just sending information out, but it's receiving that.
Right, exactly. Is there anything that you personally do, or?
I would say that it's good to get out and about unannounced. Right, so you can maybe schedule coffee dates. Maybe you're in a meeting in the building and you wanted to touch base with some key stakeholders, kind of dropping in and asking how it's going. It gives you maybe a glimpse into what their normal day-to-day is, and you might catch a pain point that's very valuable to you versus scheduling meetings and making it a more formal process. It's just kind of that, I think the term from years and years ago is management by walking around, but it's really getting out there and getting in the environment that your stakeholders are in and seeing what they're experiencing.
Right.
Because if you stay in your office or just in the meeting rooms, you're going to miss a lot of valuable information.
Right, yeah. So it sounds like there's a lot of communication and engagement involved when it comes to adaptive leadership.
Definitely, it definitely is, and it's a team effort. It's team sport.
Yeah. And are there times when, you know, because if you are going through changes and stuff and you've got some pushback, I mean, what does that look like? We did talk a little bit about how to encourage people, but what happens if there really is more pushback, and how do you deal with that as an adaptive leader?
So pushback is another type of information that's coming back from you. So it's really peeling back the layers to understand, where is that pushback coming from? Is it a comfort issue? Is there something that's a real barrier that you want to address? And so it's that gift of getting that as a heads up to say, geez, I didn't know that not having this plan in place, I didn't know that we didn't have this plan in place, so let's redirect some resources. And so I listen to it as an input, and there are some inputs that as you assess them, you're like, you know what, it's not really credible, let's help with some communication or some dialogue, but we still need to keep going.
Right.
Versus the other pushback that you might get that you're like, wow, never thought about that. And it's, it's gives you the opportunity to redirect.
Right, yeah, so some of it can be really worthwhile information that we need to dig a little bit deeper in.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And I mean, is being open to change, is that always necessary as a leader?
So I think it goes back to the previous example. You want to be able to explain why you're making the change, what the benefits of the change are. Because people do react sometimes very strongly to change, so you want to be able to have that elevator speech, if you will, to explain it to people. But then there are times when you don't want to just keep introducing change if there's no good valid reason. Let the team stabilize, let the organization stabilize, and pick your next opportunity. That's part of the adaptive leadership. You're being proactive, you're looking out on that horizon, and you're trying to plan ahead for the change, so there's plenty of change opportunities.
Right, yeah. Awesome. So what else would you like to share about adaptive leadership? I know we talked a little bit beforehand, and you said you looked into it a little bit more. I'm just curious what you learned.
Yeah, so I think to me, adaptive leadership appears to be kind of some of the best of so many of the different leadership styles that I've studied in the past, in terms of the flexibility, engaging your teams, the situational leadership that we've talked about, because it's different. So it's almost as much as adaptive leadership is about a living organism. It seems like adaptive leadership is how our thinking about leadership has evolved, because it takes the pieces of leadership training and thought leadership that we've heard, and it kind of takes the best pieces of it.
Yeah, puts it all together.
So that's a little rambling way to say that, but yeah.
Yeah, and what's your advice to someone who is trying to be more of an adaptive leader?
My advice would be to listen very actively, and I would get out and about, not only to stakeholders, but people who actually do the work that you're working through with them, and make sure that you take into account their feedback and help them understand why you're looking at change and really the benefits for them.
Yeah, that's awesome. And as we kind of start to wrap up here, what are some of your final thoughts about adaptive leadership and the importance or impact of it?
So I think as we go into this next decade, we see technology increasing at such a rapid pace. It only makes sense that to lead people, we're going to have to help them keep up with that technological pace of growth, and so adaptive leadership is key to that.
Yeah, awesome. I love that as a thought.
Thank you.
Well, I think that you've really gave some good insight about adaptive leadership. It sounds like it's really based on communication and feedback and engagement with your team as well.
Oh, it definitely is. And that active listening and planning.
Yeah, it's definitely all the keys to leadership rolled up.
It is. It definitely is.
Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Well,
We're so glad that you guys joined us. Again, please leave any questions that you have, anything you want to learn about adaptive leadership. And at MSBCoach, we do one-on-one coaching and training. So if you and your team need any additional coaching services, please either check out our website, msbcoach.com, or email us at info@msbcoach.com. And next month we are talking about time management, so I hope you join us again then. Until next time.